"Can you go find us a real doctor?" She pointed. The words, sharp as a scalpel, cut through the hushed tension of the pre-operative corridor. She was Caitlin Vance, 35 years old, an heiress to a real estate empire, and a self-styled guru of vitality with 2.3 million online followers hanging on her every pronouncement. The man she was pointing at was Dr. Eris Thorne, 68 years old, a widower. And in that moment, in his worn tweed jacket and soft-soled shoes, he looked less like a surgeon and more like a history professor who had taken a wrong turn. He was standing by a bank of monitors, his back to the room, his attention fixed on the jagged, panicked rhythm of a human heart displayed in electric green. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, a statue of calm in a storm of her making. The air crackled, thick with the unspoken. The chief of staff, a woman named Ramirez, looked as if she'd been struck. What happened next wouldn't just silence the room. It would shatter a billion-dollar legacy and rewrite the very definition of power. 35 years before that morning, Eris Thorne was not a quiet man. He was a force, a brilliant, driven, and often stubborn resident at Johns Hopkins, a scholarship kid from a neighborhood that didn't produce surgeons. He was fueled by a potent mixture of coffee, ambition, and the burning need to prove wrong every person who saw his skin color before they saw his mind. He moved through the world with a chip on his shoulder the size of a medical textbook. The field of cardiothoracic surgery in the 1980s was a fortress, guarded by generations of men who all looked the same, sounded the same, and came from the same handful of schools. Eris was an anomaly. He was quieter in his speech than his peers, but his hands were more eloquent. In the operating room, he found a place where the noise of prejudice fell away, where there was only the clean, indisputable logic of anatomy and the pure, terrifying responsibility of holding a life in his hands. He met Eleanor there. She was a scrub nurse with eyes that saw past his defensiveness and a laugh that could disarm a battalion. She didn't see a black doctor trying to make it in a white world. She saw Eris. She saw the way he'd stay late, not for ambition, but to reread a patient's chart, searching for a ghost in the data that might give them a fraction of a percentage better chance. She saw the way his hands, so powerful and decisive in the OR, would tremble slightly when he held a cup of coffee afterward, the adrenaline finally leaving his system. They fell in love over suture trays and late-night cafeteria meals. She was his anchor, the one who taught him that he didn't have to be a warrior every second of the day. With her, he could just be a man. His career was a quiet rocket. He didn't play the political games. He didn't publish papers for the sake of publishing. He solved problems. While other surgeons were building their reputations, Eris was building better techniques. He saw the aortic valve not as a simple plumbing fixture, but as a delicate, dynamic piece of biological art. He became obsessed with high-risk cases, the ones other surgeons deemed inoperable. These were the elderly, the frail, the patients with comorbidities that made them statistical liabilities. To other hospitals, they were rounding errors. To Eris, they were a challenge to his craft. It was during this time that he developed what residents would later whisper about as the Thorne stitch. It wasn't a single technique, but a whole philosophy of tissue handling, a way of suturing that was so gentle, so precise, it seemed to persuade the body to heal rather than command it. He could repair an aortic dissection that looked like shredded paper, his needle moving in a blur that defied belief. He never wrote a book about it. He never went on a lecture tour. He just did the work. His reputation grew not in the pages of glossy magazines, but in the hushed, grateful conversations between doctors in hospital corridors across the country. When a top surgeon had a family member with a hopeless case, The call they made wasn't to the Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo. It was to Eris Thorne. He became chief of cardiothoracic surgery. He had the corner office, the endowed chair, the respect he had fought so hard for. He and Eleanor bought a brownstone. They talked about traveling when he retired, about Tuscany, about seeing the cherry blossoms in Japan. And then, one Tuesday, Eleanor had a headache. She took 2 aspirin and went to lie down. An hour later, Aris found her. A subarachnoid hemorrhage. A burst vessel in her brain. Sudden, catastrophic, and completely unrelated to the organ he had mastered. There was nothing he could do. The world's greatest heart surgeon stood helpless as the love of his life slipped away. The irony was so cruel, so absolute, it broke him. He resigned his position the next day. He walked away from the prestigious hospital, from the corner office, from the title. The fire that had driven him for 40 years was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet ash. He retreated into his brownstone and into himself. For a year, he did nothing. The silence in the house was a physical presence, her reading glasses still on the nightstand, her favorite scarf still draped over a chair. He found his way back not in an operating room, but in his basement workshop. He started collecting and repairing antique clocks. It was a way to keep his hands busy, a way to impose order on a world that had become chaotic. The intricate gears, the delicate springs, the patient, methodical work of bringing something broken back to life. It was a form of prayer. He would spend hours with a jeweler's loop, his large surgeon's hands moving with impossible delicacy, coaxing a 19th-century chronometer back into a steady rhythm. Just breathing, just brass, just discipline. Eventually, a former colleague, Dr. Ramirez, now the chief of staff at the massive, underfunded University City Hospital, called him. She didn't ask him to come back to work. She just asked for his opinion on a difficult case. A pro bono patient, no insurance, a ticking bomb in his chest. Aris went in, looked at the scans, and quietly told them how to fix it. A week later, she called about another, and another. Soon, he had a routine. He would wake at 4:30 a.m. He would walk through the pre-dawn city. He would spend 2 hours in his workshop, his mind lost in the patient ticking of his clocks. Then he would put on an old tweed jacket, pick up his 20-year-old leather medical bag, and drive his modest Volvo to the city hospital. He never took a salary. He only took the cases no one else would. The ghosts, the hopeless ones. The hospital staff came to know him as a quiet, benevolent legend, a whisper, the ghost of the OR. He was a man who had lost everything, and so had nothing left to prove. He was there simply to honor his gift, one impossible case at a time. Caitlin Vance's world, in contrast, was built entirely on proof. Proof of wealth, proof of status, proof of superiority. She was born into a world where problems were not solved, they were bought away. Her father, Harrison Vance, was a titan of real estate, a man who moved skylines and bulldozed history for profit. Caitlin grew up in a Fifth Avenue penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on the power of money. She learned early that value was not intrinsic. It was assigned, displayed, and aggressively defended. She never had to work, so she invented a job for herself. She became a brand, Vance Vitality. It started with an Instagram account showcasing her flawless, surgically enhanced life. Yachting in Monaco, skiing in Gstaad, sitting front row at Paris Fashion Week. She presented this not as a product of inherited wealth, but as the result of a superior lifestyle philosophy. She was an influencer, a guru of aspirational living. Her content was a masterclass in performative dominance. She didn't just recommend a brand of bottled water, she exposed the toxic microplastics in others, filming herself berating the manager of a high-end grocery store. She didn't just follow a diet, she preached a doctrine of genetic optimization and cellular cleansing, selling her followers $200 bottles of supplements that were little more than powdered greens in a sleek, minimalist bottle. The cruelty was a feature, not a bug. It generated engagement. Her followers, a mix of the envious and the aspirational, saw her public takedowns of service staff, her dismissive eye rolls at anyone she deemed lesser, as a sign of strength. She was a woman who took no prisoners and spoke her truth. Her truth just happened to be that she was better than everyone else, and you could be too if you bought her masterclass. The entire enterprise was a carefully constructed facade. Her Vance Vitality supplements were produced by a white label manufacturer in New Jersey. Her blog posts on mitochondrial health and biohacking were ghostwritten by a team of freelancers. Her father's money propped up the entire operation, buying her followers, boosting her posts, and silencing any potential lawsuits with non-disclosure agreements. Caitlin's true talent wasn't in wellness. It was in marketing the illusion of control. She was the polished, perfect CEO of a company whose only product was her own curated image. Her father's sudden illness was the first thing in her life that she couldn't control. Harrison Vance wasn't supposed to get sick. He was 72, but he had the best trainers, the best chefs, the best doctors money could buy. He was a monument, not a man. But one afternoon during a hostile takeover negotiation, the monument cracked. He clutched his chest, a look of profound surprise on his face, and collapsed onto a billion-dollar mahogany conference table. The diagnosis was a nightmare, a catastrophic type A aortic dissection. The inner wall of the largest artery in his body had torn. Blood was surging into the space between the layers, effectively creating a new, false channel that was ballooning under pressure, threatening to rupture at any second. It was the biological equivalent of a dam breach in slow motion. He was rushed to the nearest Level 1 trauma center, which, by a quirk of Manhattan geography, was not some boutique private hospital, but the sprawling, chaotic, brilliant University City Hospital. The surgeons in the ER took one look at the CT scan and knew they were out of their depth. The tear was complex, extending all the way up into the aortic arch, the delicate curve that supplies blood to the brain. This wasn't just surgery, it was a Hail Mary. The chief resident, a young man who still had the shine of medical school on him, looked at his attending. "This is a thorn case," he whispered, as if speaking of a mythical beast. The call was made. In his quiet brownstone in Brooklyn, Eris Thorne was hunched over his workbench, a tiny brass gear held in a pair of tweezers. The clock was a French carriage clock from 1880, and its escapement was off by a quarter of a second a day. It was a puzzle he was determined to solve. His phone rang, a simple, jarring buzz against the quiet ticking of a dozen other clocks. It was Dr. Ramirez. She didn't waste time. "Aris, I have one for you. A bad one. A real bad one." He listened for 30 seconds, his eyes closed, visualizing the scans she was describing. He could see the tear, the false lumen, the compromised blood flow to the carotid arteries. He saw the path the needle would have to take. "I'm on my way," he said. He didn't ask who the patient was. He didn't ask about insurance. He simply put the tiny gear down in a velvet-lined tray, washed his hands for a full 2 minutes with his usual surgical precision, shrugged on the tweed jacket that hung by the door, and walked out into the afternoon. He was not going to the hospital to save a billionaire. He was going to fix a broken pump. It was the only thing he knew how to do. By the time Eris arrived, the Vance family had descended upon the surgical waiting floor like a conquering army. Caitlin was at the center of the storm, her phone in hand, broadcasting a live stream to her followers. "You guys are not going to believe this," she said, her voice a carefully modulated performance of outrage. "We're in the middle of New York City, and this is the level of care my father is getting. It's an absolute disgrace." She panned her phone across the clean, modern, but undeniably public waiting area. It lacked the wood paneling and obsequious staff she was accustomed to. Dr. Ramirez, the chief of staff, was trying to manage the unmanageable. "Miss Vance," she said, her voice tight with professionalism, "your father is receiving the best possible care. We have the top team assembling as we speak." "The top team?" Caitlin scoffed, turning the phone back to her face. "The top team at a public hospital. Do you know who my father is?" It was a statement, not a question. It was into this vortex of entitlement and anxiety that Dr. Eris Thorne walked. He didn't announce himself. He simply moved through the periphery of the chaos, his old leather bag in one hand, his eyes already scanning the environment. He saw the family huddled together, their expensive clothes looking out of place under the fluorescent lights. He saw the fear beneath their bluster. He nodded to a nurse he recognized, who handed him a tablet with Harrison Vance's scans. He found a quiet corner and became absorbed. The world of Caitlin Vance, of her live stream, of the family's panic, it all melted away. There was only the image on the screen, the beautiful, terrible, intricate map of a man's impending death. He zoomed in, tracing the path of the dissection, measuring the diameter of the aorta, calculating the angles. In his mind, the surgery was already beginning. Caitlin, however, saw something else. She saw an old man in a shabby jacket loitering in a restricted area during her family's crisis. He wasn't wearing scrubs. He wasn't barking orders. He was just standing there. He was part of the general air of incompetence she had decided defined this place. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. He didn't respond. He was tracing a vessel with his finger on the screen, his lips moving in a silent count. "Excuse me," she said again, louder this time, stepping directly into his line of sight. Eris looked up, his focus broken. His eyes were calm, tired but intensely present. They held no deference but no judgment either. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything. "We are in the middle of an emergency," Caitlin said, her voice dripping with condescension. "My father, Harrison Vance, needs a doctor, not whatever it is you are." She gestured vaguely at his jacket, his simple shoes. He said nothing. He just looked at her. The silence unnerved her. It was a lack of reaction she wasn't used to. It felt like a challenge. She turned to Dr. Ramirez, who was rushing over, her face a mask of horror. Caitlin pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the quiet man holding the tablet. "Can you go find us a real doctor?" The words hung in the sterile air, a monument to arrogance. The nurses froze. An intern, fetching coffee, stopped dead in his tracks. On Caitlin's phone, the comments on her live stream exploded with validating fire emojis and "You tell them, Queen." But in the hallway, the only sound was the faint electronic hum of the machinery and the frantic, unheard beating of Harrison Vance's failing heart. For a long moment, nobody moved. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Ramirez looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Caitlin stood her ground, chin high, basking in the power of her own audacity, and Eris Thorne, he simply held her gaze. In that moment he saw it all. He saw the terrified daughter cowering inside the shell of the powerful influencer. He saw the lifetime of privilege that had taught her that the world could be bent to her will through sheer force of volume. He saw the profound, tragic ignorance of a person who judged value only by its packaging. He could have destroyed her with a single sentence. He could have listed his credentials, his awards, the lives he had saved. He could have laid bare the chasm between his reality and her perception. He did none of those things. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not agreement. Then he turned. He turned his back on her, on Dr. Ramirez, on the entire scene. He took one step toward the exit, then another. His hand reached for the cool metal bar of the door leading back out into the civilian world. This was the moment that mattered more than the surgery, more than the insults, more than the reputation. It was the choice. He could walk through that door and be back in his workshop in an hour. The ticking of the clock's a balm for the indignity. He could let them call the Mayo Clinic, let them scramble a jet, and know with absolute certainty that by the time they found another surgeon, Harrison Vance would be dead. He could let arrogance meet its natural fatal consequence. His fingers brushed the door handle, and then he stopped. His shoulders, which had slumped for a fraction of a second, straightened. He did not turn to face Caitlin. He would not give her that satisfaction. Instead, he turned back toward Dr. Ramirez, who was still standing, pale and speechless. He moved with a sudden, quiet purpose. He walked over to her and held out the tablet. His voice, when it came, was low and clear, devoid of any emotion except focus. "Prep the hybrid OR," he said. "I'll need the .014 fathom steerable wire and a 26mm Sapien 3-valve. He looked past her, his eyes already in the operating room. "And tell the perfusionist we're going for a full circulatory arrest with retrograde cerebral perfusion." He walked to a nearby chair and set down his old leather bag. With deliberate, unhurried movements, he began to unbutton his tweed jacket. The room was so preternaturally quiet that the sound of the small leather-bound buttons sliding through the fabric was audible. He folded the jacket neatly and placed it on the chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his simple white shirt, revealing forearms that were not the soft, pale arms of an academic, but the roped, sinewy forearms of a craftsman. The muscles were etched by 40 years of 8-hour surgeries, of holding retractors, of tying thousands upon thousands of perfect knots. The room, which had been frozen in shock, now went silent with a different kind of energy, awe. The performance was over. The work was about to begin. Without another word, without a single glance in Caitlin Vance's direction, he walked toward the double doors marked "Surgical Staff Only" and pushed them open. He was gone. Caitlin stood, momentarily confused. The wind knocked from her sails by the sheer, unexpected force of his quietude. She turned to Dr. Ramirez, ready to resume her tirade. "Who does he think he is, giving orders?" Dr. Ramirez cut her off. The chief of staff's face was transformed. The harried, professional mask was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. "The man," she said, her voice dangerously low, "that you just dismissed, the man you compared to a janitor, is Dr. Eris Thorne." The name hung in the air. It meant nothing to Caitlin. She was about to say so, but Dr. Ramirez stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to listen. "He didn't just give orders," she hissed. "He laid out a surgical plan of such elegance and complexity that it would take me 10 minutes to explain it to a team of other heart surgeons. The equipment he just requested? We have it because he pioneered its use. The procedure he mentioned? Full circulatory arrest? We're going to cool your father's body to the point of clinical death, stop his heart, and drain the blood from his body so Dr. Thorne can rebuild his aorta in a bloodless field. It's the most dangerous and difficult procedure in all of medicine." She took a breath, her eyes locking with Caitlin's. "Dr. Thorne is the only surgeon on the East Coast, maybe in the entire world, with a success rate over 90% for this specific catastrophic injury. There is no real doctor coming to save the day, Miss Vance. There is only him. The man you just humiliated in front of my entire staff. He is the only person on this planet who can save your father. And you just insulted him. So I suggest you go to that waiting room, you turn off your phone, and you pray. You pray that he is a better person than you are. The takedown was not a confrontation. It was a 7-hour masterclass in a closed room. Inside Hybrid OR3, the atmosphere was one of monastic concentration. Dr. Thorne moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. His hands, which had seemed so ordinary in the hallway, were now instruments of impossible grace and speed. When he called for an instrument, it was placed in his hand without him needing to look up. His team, a collection of the hospital's best nurses, anesthesiologists, and perfusionists, moved around him in a silent, practiced ballet. The Thorne stitch was not a myth. The residents watching from the overhead observation dome could barely follow it. His needle and forceps became a blur, weaving a new reality for the shredded tissue of the aorta, his sutures so perfectly spaced, so evenly tensioned, they looked like they had been placed by a machine. He worked in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator, the soft beeps of the monitors, and his own calm, even breathing. Just breathing, just canvas, just discipline. At the 7-hour mark, he placed the final stitch, restored blood flow, and watched as the heart, which had been still and gray, blushed pink and, with a single electric jolt, leapt back into a steady, perfect rhythm. He stripped off his gloves, said a quiet thank you to his team, and walked out. Caitlin and her family were sequestered in a private waiting room. The live stream was long over. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a cold, gnawing dread. The words of Dr. Ramirez echoed in the silent room. They had not spoken a word for hours. The door opened, and they all looked up, expecting a surgeon in scrubs. Instead, it was a man in a different kind of uniform. The crisp, decorated dress, blues of a 4-star general of the United States Army. It was General Mark O'Connell, a close family friend of Harrison's, a man who sat on the boards of defense contractors and had the ear of presidents. "Mark," Caitlin's mother breathed, a sound of relief. O'Connell didn't smile. His face was grim. "I came as soon as I heard. I just spent the last hour in the observation dome." He looked directly at Caitlin, his eyes like chips of granite. "I trust you've had a chance to thank the man who is saving your father's life." Caitlin flushed. We haven't seen him." "You saw him," O'Connell said, his voice flat. "I heard what happened in the hallway." The color drained from Caitlin's face. "Let me tell you about that janitor," the general said, his voice dangerously soft. 10 years ago, I had what they call a widowmaker lesion in my left anterior descending artery. My heart was a ticking time bomb. The surgeons at Walter Reed, the best in the military, told my wife to make arrangements. They said it was inoperable. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. Someone gave me a name, a legend, a surgeon who took on the hopeless cases, Dr. Aris Thorne. He took me on, no cameras, no press release. He went into my chest and rebuilt my heart. He didn't do it for the fame, or the money, or because I was a general. He did it because it was a challenge, and he is a master of his craft. O'Connell pulled out his phone. He didn't show them a social media profile. He showed them a scanned PDF of a deeply academic, obscure medical journal from 1998. There was a photo of a much younger Aris Thorne, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo, accepting an award called the Golden Scalpel, the highest international prize for surgical innovation, an award he had won twice. Then he swiped to another document, this one with Top Secret redacted at the top. It was a citation, a commendation for Dr. Thorne's service as a consultant to the military's Special Operations Command, detailing 2 separate occasions where he had been flown into active combat zones to perform miraculous, life-saving surgeries on critically wounded soldiers in makeshift field hospitals. "That man," the general said, his voice a low growl, "has been decorated for valor by 2 different presidents. He's a national treasure who chose to walk away from the spotlight to do the work that matters. He is the definition of a real doctor. And you treated him like he was nothing." He put his phone away. "Your father is going to live, no thanks to you. The surgery was a flawless success. Harrison Vance would make a full recovery. But for Caitlin Vance, the true catastrophe was just beginning." Her live stream had captured her words, but a nurse's aide, horrified by what she was witnessing, had recorded the whole scene on her own phone. It was a different angle, raw, unfiltered. It showed Caitlin's sneering face, her entitled posture, and the quiet, unshakable dignity of the old man she was trying to humiliate. The video went viral. But it didn't go viral with Caitlin's curated audience of sycophants. It broke containment and hit the real world. Someone online, a medical student perhaps, recognized the name Dr. Eris Thorne. They posted a comment, "Wait, is that the Eris Thorne?" And the floodgates opened. Doctors, nurses, and former patients from across the country began to weigh in. The story of the golden scalpels emerged. General O'Connell's story was leaked. The hashtag #VanceVitality was suddenly drowned out by #ThankYou Dr. Thorne. The downfall was breathtakingly swift. The clip became a global symbol of arrogance and ignorance. Late-night hosts made jokes about it. News outlets ran side-by-side profiles. The quiet, brilliant surgeon and the loud, empty heiress. Her sponsors, terrified of the association, dropped her in a series of terse press releases. The FDA opened an investigation into the false and misleading claims made by her supplement company. Her father, upon waking and being gently informed by General O'Connell of what had transpired, was mortified. In a single, quiet conversation, he severed her from the family business and its finances. Caitlin deleted all her social media accounts, but the internet had already saved the receipts. She vanished from public life, her empire of influence collapsing into a silent, digital ruin. Harrison Vance, humbled and profoundly grateful, tried to write Dr. Thorne a check for a sum with 7 zeros. Eris refused it. He held up a hand. "Your health is the only payment I require," he said. "But if you feel the need to express your gratitude, pay the hospital. They need it more than I do." Harrison Vance did more than that. He made a $50 million donation to University City Hospital, with one condition, that it be used to establish the Eleanor Thorne Center for Cardiovascular Innovation. The next year was a montage of redemption. A new glass and steel wing rose from the concrete of the old hospital campus. Trucks delivered crates of state-of-the-art equipment. The center became a beacon, attracting the brightest young minds in medicine. And at its heart was Dr. Thorne. He wasn't the director, he refused the title, but he was its soul. He'd walk the halls in his same old tweed jacket, a living legend mentoring a new generation. We see him in a high-tech simulation lab, his hands guiding the hands of a young, eager resident, teaching them the secrets of the Thorne stitch, passing on his gift not for glory, but for the good of the work. He had found a new purpose, a way to honor his wife's memory, not by retreating from the world, but by building a better piece of it. 1 year to the day after the surgery, we are in Dr. Thorne's new office. It's a simple space, but it's his. On his desk, next to a stack of medical journals, sits a beautifully restored French carriage clock from 1880. It's ticking a soft, steady heartbeat in the quiet room. Eleanor's reading glasses rest beside it. There's a soft knock on the door. A young woman in blue scrubs, a first-year resident, peeks her head in. Her face is a mixture of awe and anxiety. "Dr. Thorne, I'm sorry to bother you. We have a difficult case, an aortic arch aneurysm, post-dissection, very complex anatomy. No one else will touch it. They said to ask you." Eris Thorne looks up from the notes he is reviewing. The afternoon light catches the silver in his hair. He gives the young doctor a smile. Not the tired, distant look from the hallway a year ago, but a warm, genuine smile that reaches his eyes. He carefully sets down his pen. "Tell me about it," he says. "We've all seen a Caitlin Vance. Maybe not with a billion-dollar trust fund, but with the same casual cruelty. The person who dismisses the barista for having an accent. The manager who belittles the janitor in a public hallway. The anonymous online commenter who tears down a stranger's work just for the momentary thrill of it. We live in a world that worships the performance of success, the filtered photo, the curated bio, the loudest voice in the room. We have been trained, conditioned, and algorithmically pushed to judge a book by its cover, because the cover is all we are ever shown. But true mastery doesn't need a filter. True greatness does not need to announce itself. It is quiet. It is patient. It is the 10,000 hours of practice when no one is watching. It is the steady hand, the focused mind, the humble heart. It is the old man in the worn jacket who holds life and death in his hands and asks for nothing in return. It is the knowledge that the work is its own reward. So the next time you find yourself quick to judge, the next time you feel the urge to dismiss someone based on what you see, pause. Take a breath. Remember Dr. Eris Thorne. Remember that the most important person in the room is often the one who is the most quiet. Remember that expertise is earned in silence, not proclaimed from a stage. What hidden greatness have you walked past today? What quiet mastery did you fail to notice? Let us know your story in the comments. Share this if you believe true value is more than skin deep. And subscribe for more stories that remind us all to look closer. #LookCloser. #TrueExpertise. #Humility.